20,000 dead in 3 days. That was all that remained of Rome's pride in the autumn of the 9th year after Christ. 3 legions, the most disciplined army the known world had ever seen, swallowed by the black mud of the Teutoburg forest, while a Germanic warrior who had grown up in Rome watched them die. Arminius, the perfect traitor, the one who had learned everything from the enemy in order to destroy it from within. For 7 years, that forest was the empire's nightmare. 7 years of shame carved in stone. 7 years of old Augustus's cry echoing through the corridors of power. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. He never got them back. He died without seeing it. But Rome did not die with him. In the 16th year after Christ, 8 legions crossed the Rhine at dawn. The ground shook beneath their feet. The air smelled of iron and old promises. At the head of that steel avalanche marched Germanicus, the young general who carried the weight of 2 generations of humiliation on his shoulders, the man whom Tiberius himself had sent with a simple and devastating order: finish this. Arminius waited for them on the plains of Idistaviso, beside the Vaser river. He had his warriors, he had the forest at his back. He had the memory of Teutoburg as both shield and spear. It was not enough. When the summer sun reached its 5th hour above the horizon, the silence shattered with a single blow. Arrows, hundreds, thousands, falling like black rain from every angle. The legions locked shields and advanced without hesitation. The Germanic warriors charged with the fury of those who have won before and believe they will always win. They crashed against the Roman wall like waves against rock. The wall did not give. The Batavian cavalry flanked from the left, the Gallic from the right. The circle closed, and what had been a charge of free warriors became a trap with no way out. From the 5th hour of morning until sundown, Idistaviso was a slaughterhouse. Those who fled to the river died in the water. Those who climbed the trees were shot down by archers. 10 miles of land were left covered in Germanic bodies and shattered weapons. Arminius barely escaped. Wounded, disguised in another man's blood, vanishing into the darkness with what little he had left. When the last light of day died over the Vaser, Rome raised its trophy on the field. A monument of stacked spears and shields, bearing an inscription that the northern winds would carry for centuries. The army of Tiberius Caesar, having thoroughly conquered the tribes between the Rhine and the Elbe, dedicates this monument to Mars, to Jupiter, and to Augustus. The eagles had returned. The debt was paid. This is the story of how Rome not only avenged its dead, but of how a young general turned the empire's worst defeat into the opening of its greatest campaign of retribution. In the autumn of the 9th year after Christ, the governor Publius Quintilius Varus marched toward the Teutoburg forest at the head of 3 legions, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th. With more than 20,000 men in total, he went confidently, almost carelessly. At his side rode Arminius, prince of the Cherusci, auxiliary officer of Rome, Roman citizen, a man in whom Varus placed absolute trust. He was brilliant, disciplined, loyal in appearance. He had grown up in Rome from a young age, learned the language, fought under the standards, and earned the rank of equestrian. The empire considered him one of its own. What Varus did not know was that Arminius had spent months building the most lethal trap any Germanic warrior had ever conceived. He knew Roman discipline, its strengths and its blind spots. He understood that the legions were invincible in open ground, but vulnerable in broken, narrow, waterlogged terrain. And when the columns pushed deep into the labyrinth of trees and ravines of the Teutoburg forest, Arminius galloped away to join his warriors. The rain began to fall. The sky closed over bronze helmets, and from the forest burst a storm of spears, arrows, and painted bodies that gave no rest for 3 days. 20,000 Roman soldiers died on those wet hills. Varus fell upon his own sword before he could be captured. The three sacred eagles of the legions vanished into the Germanic mud. When the news reached the capital, the Emperor Augustus wandered the corridors of his palace in complete despair. According to the historian Suetonius, he let his beard grow for months as a sign of mourning and beat his head against the walls, crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." He never got them back. He died 5 years later, that wound still open. The defeat at Teutoburg was something more than a lost battle. It was a wound in the soul of the empire. 3 numbers were erased forever from Rome's military records: 17, 18, 19. Those numerals would not be assigned to any future legion. It was a permanent mourning engraved into the military system itself. The frontier of the empire, which the Romans believed they could push all the way to the Elbe, recoiled in a single blow back to the Rhine, where it would remain for centuries. But Rome did not forget. In the Rhine camps, as the years passed and the embers of campfires lit the faces of veterans, Teutoburg was spoken of in hushed voices, the way men speak when they are waiting for the moment to settle a debt that time cannot erase. That moment would come, and the man chosen to fulfill it was Germanicus Julius Caesar. Germanicus had been born in the 15th year before Christ, son of the general Drusus the Elder, the one who had pushed deeper into the northern lands than any other Roman before him. He was the nephew of the new Emperor Tiberius and the adopted great-grandson of Augustus himself, bearer of a name that was not merely a title, but a promise. Germanicus meant conqueror of Germania. He carried that name the way one carries a debt that someone else incurred, but that only you can pay. He was young when he assumed command of the Rhine legions, but what he was capable of was already evident. He had the mind of a strategist who had studied every detail of Varus's defeat. He understood that in those lands, a Roman general could not operate the way he would around the Mediterranean. He had to adapt. He had to be as relentless and as flexible as the Germanic forest itself. His soldiers adored him and called him the son of the camp. When the Rhine legions began to mutiny after the death of Augustus in the 14th year, it was Germanicus who stepped before them without an escort, who spoke with a firm voice and an open heart, who managed to redirect the fury of thousands of men toward the only horizon that made sense: East Germania, revenge. In his shadow, in the forests on the far side of the Rhine, stood his adversary. Arminius was around 30 years old when Germanicus launched his campaigns. He was the hero of Teutoburg, the liberator of the Germanic peoples, the only man who had broken Rome's pride on the battlefield. But victory had transformed him into something more complicated than a hero. Within his own tribe, the Cherusci, voices were growing louder, saying that Arminius wanted too much power, that he was reaching for kingship. His own father-in-law, Segestes, was openly pro-Roman and had tried to warn Varus about the conspiracy before Teutoburg without being heard. The unity of the Germanic tribes was always fragile, prone to unraveling under the pressure of time and the threat of an enemy that did not forget. The first sign of what was coming arrived in the autumn of the 14th year. Barely weeks after the death of the Emperor Augustus, Germanicus crossed the Rhine before winter could close the roads. This was not a calmly planned campaign. It was a warning blow, a signal to his own soldiers that the mourning was over and the war of vengeance had begun. The target was the territory of the Marsi, a people who lived along the banks of the Ruhr River and had celebrated the defeat of Varus with particular enthusiasm. The march was conducted at night in absolute silence, moving through the trees with torches extinguished so as not to betray the position. Germanicus divided his army into 4 columns and deployed them in a semicircle around the Marsi settlements. The attack began before dawn. The surprise was total. The Marsi, celebrating their religious festivals without the slightest suspicion of danger, had no time to react. The legions leveled their villages with the cold efficiency of men who had not come to negotiate. Neighboring tribes, the Bructeri, the Tubantes, and the Usipetes, attempted to ambush the Romans on their withdrawal. Germanicus anticipated it. He placed his legions in a square formation and pushed through the forest like an iron wall. The Germanic warriors were driven back with heavy losses. The Romans returned to the Rhine with plunder and with the certainty that something had changed. The tiger had left its cage. But that first campaign was only the prologue. The year 15 marked the beginning of the true war of vengeance. Germanicus divided his forces into two great columns. The legate Aulus Caecina Severus marched with 4 legions and auxiliary contingents, approximately 25,000 men, pushing from the north toward the Ems River. At the same time, Germanicus himself led a second army of comparable size against the Chatti in the south, marching on their capital, Mattium, and burning it to the ground. In total, the Roman forces numbered more than 50,000 men deployed across several simultaneous fronts. It was the greatest military concentration Rome had sent into Germania in decades. It was during that campaign of the 15th year that one of the most charged moments of the entire war took place. Germanicus ordered a halt with no tactical purpose. His soldiers had to visit the place where the legions of Varus had died, the Teutoburg forest. The silence that greeted them there was unlike that of any ordinary forest. It was a silence heavy with something nameless. The legionaries moved through what remained of Varus's positions, half-collapsed earthworks, ditches filled with black water, fragments of shields and corroded armor among the roots. And then there were the bones. Heaps of bleached bones scattered across the ground, skulls nailed to the trunks of oak trees, remnants of altars where the Germanic warriors had sacrificed prisoners. Tacitus wrote that the soldiers looked upon those remains as though they were the bones of their own brothers in blood. Some wept, many set their jaws, and every one of them understood in that instant exactly why they were there. Germanicus ordered the remains buried. It was an act of piety and also of politics. His legionaries needed that ceremony. They needed to see the shame being washed away bone by bone. Then they moved on. Also during that campaign of the 15th year, the Romans recovered something of near sacred importance to the legions. The eagle of the 19th, one of the 3 sacred standards lost at Teutoburg. The eagle was not merely hammered metal. It was the soul of a legion. Recovering it was a declaration that Rome was not dead, that the wound could close, that the term of shame had a limit. That same campaign brought another piece of news with devastating personal consequences for Arminius. The Romans captured Thusnelda, his wife, daughter of the pro-Roman chieftain Segestes. Thusnelda was pregnant when she was taken prisoner. She would give birth to her son in captivity on Roman soil. Arminius would never see his wife again and would never know his son. The news shook him to the core. But it did not break him. It hardened him. He kept fighting. The 16th year arrived loaded with iron and total resolve. Germanicus organized the largest campaign of his life. 8 complete legions with Gallic and allied Germanic auxiliaries, Eastern archers, Batavian and Chauci cavalry, considered among the finest in the Roman world, engineers and field artillery. The Rhine fleet was converted into an invasion force capable of transporting men and supplies across the North Sea, deep into the interior of Germania. Historians estimate the total size of Germanicus's army that year at between 50,000 and more than 80,000 fighters, an unprecedented demonstration of imperial will. Rome's answer to Teutoburg expressed not in words, but in legions. Arminius knew what was coming. He summoned his allies, the Cherusci, the Angrivari, the Chatti, and other peoples, and spoke to them of Teutoburg, of freedom won with blood. He reminded them that they had defeated Rome once, But Arminius's words this time did not fall on the same fertile soil as 7 years before. The tribes had suffered years of Roman reprisals. Their villages had burned. Their sacred lands had been desecrated. Their women and children had been dragged as slaves toward the Rhine. The fire of anger still burned, but so did the fire of fear. And fear, unlike anger, does not fight well in open ground. Germanicus forced a crossing of the Vaser River near what is today the German city of Minden. The Germanic warriors attacked during the crossing, trying to stop him. They could not. The Romans established a bridgehead and began crossing in ever-growing numbers. And then something occurred that no military chronicle could have invented. From opposite banks of the Vaser, two brothers shouted at each other across the roar of the river. Flavus, Arminius's brother, who had remained loyal to Rome and fought under Germanicus's command, exchanged words with Arminius across the water. Tacitus narrated this conversation with an intensity that would seem theatrical if it were not completely real. Arminius asked his brother why he fought on Rome's side. Flavus answered with pride: the pay, the honors, the citizenship, the respect of the empire. Arminius replied with contempt that the freedom of his people was worth more than any Roman reward. The two men hurled insults at each other across the roar of the Vaser with all the fury of a family history, torn apart by a war that neither had entirely chosen. The river separated two worlds, and both worlds shared the same blood. The following day, Arminius gathered his warriors and spoke to them again of Teutoburg, of the glory of the free. Germanicus also spoke before the battle. He pointed to the crucial difference between that moment and the ambush of 7 years before. The plains of Idistaviso were not the tight forest where Varus had died. They were open ground, with space enough for the legions to deploy their true power. In open ground, Roman discipline was invincible. In open ground, the legions did what they did best: kill in formation. The morning of the Battle of Idistaviso broke with a clarity that seemed almost cruel. The summer sun lit the plains beside the Vaser, where two worlds were about to collide in a way that neither of them could ever afterward ignore. The plains stretched between the river and the forests, a space wide enough for both armies to see each other for the first time at their full extent. Germanicus positioned his men with surgical precision: auxiliary cavalry on the flanks, Batavians on the left, Gauls on the right, archers on elevated ground to sweep the zone of Germanic advance, the legionary infantry in the center, forming the wall of shields and spears that Rome had perfected across generations. Rome's Germanic allies covered the forest edges to prevent Arminius's warriors from slipping away into the trees. Arminius sent his warriors in first, a ferocious charge, full of war cries and the crash of spears against shields, with the momentum of men who fought for their homes and their history. For a few instants, the Roman line seemed to tremble under the impact. The Cherusci were formidable fighters, fierce and determined, but the shield wall held. The legions gave back barely a step, absorbed the blow, and pushed forward with the mechanical precision of thousands of men, trained their entire adult lives for exactly that moment. Then Germanicus unleashed his cavalry. The Batavian and Gallic horsemen burst from the flanks at a speed that gave the Germanic chieftains no time to regroup. They enveloped the coalition's flanks with the momentum of a vice closing shut. The warriors who had charged into the Roman center found themselves trapped between the wall of shields in front and the horsemen behind. Disorder began spreading through the Germanic ranks like flame across dry straw. Those who tried to fall back toward the forest found Rome's Germanic allies blocking the way. Those who tried to cross the river found Roman ships sealing the fords. There was no way out. There was only fighting or surrender. And Arminius's warriors did not surrender. The battle lasted from the 5th hour of the morning until the fall of the sun. According to Tacitus, When darkness covered the field, 10 miles of ground lay covered with bodies and shattered weapons. Those who tried to swim across the Vaser died under a storm of projectiles or were pulled under by the current. Those who climbed the trees searching for refuge in the heights were brought down one by archers who aimed upward with methodical and lethal patience. Arminius fought with the desperation of a man who understood in real time the magnitude of the disaster. He smeared his face with the blood of his own wounds to avoid being recognized in the chaos and cut his way through the carnage. His uncle Ingiomerus, who had faithfully accompanied him through years of resistance, also escaped badly wounded. Both survived, but only because the darkness of dusk and the confusion of thousands of men fighting simultaneously protected them in those final instants. The Germanic coalition had been destroyed, not pushed back, not scattered, destroyed. The Roman soldiers shouted the name of Tiberius, the name of the emperor who had sent them there, symbol of the imperial command that had led them to this moment of victory. On the field, Germanicus ordered the trophy of captured enemy weapons to be raised, bearing the inscription we have already heard, the fulfilled promise of an empire that never forgets. It was a message for the living and for the dead, for the 20,000 who had lain in the mud of Teutoburg for 7 years. The account was settled, but the Germanic warriors had not yet spoken their last word. The sight of the Roman trophy erected over their fallen ignited in the survivors of Arminius a rage that surpassed even exhaustion and fear. The insult was too great. A people who had shattered 3 Roman legions could not allow the enemy to plant its standard on Germanic soil without answer. Arminius, still wounded and bleeding, rallied what remained of his force and launched a new attack against the Roman positions at the Angrevarian Wall, an earthen and timber barrier that the Romans had begun using as a strongpoint after the Battle of Idistaviso. Germanicus was ready for it. He had anticipated exactly that reaction because he knew Germanic pride as well as he knew the tactical doctrine of the legions. His military engineers had prepared the ground. His archers were in position. His legions, though exhausted from the previous day, responded with all the discipline that decades of training had given them. The new Germanic assault broke against the Roman fortifications for hours. Every wave was driven back. Every charge ended with more Germanic warriors fallen on the ground. By nightfall, the Battle of the Angrevarian Wall had also ended in Roman victory. Arminius had been defeated twice in less than 2 days. What had been the hope of Germanic freedom had ceased to exist as a coherent force. When the silence fell again over the banks of the Vaser, the legionaries breathed it in as something that was not quite joy. It was relief, a relief that came from very far away, from 7 years of shame, from bleached skulls nailed to the oaks of Teutoburg, from the cry of an old emperor in marble corridors. The soldiers walked among the fallen with weariness in their bones and something lighter in their chests. The debt was paid. During that campaign of the 16th year, the Romans also recovered the second eagle lost at Teutoburg. 2 of the 3 sacred standards had returned. The third would remain lost for another 25 years, until the reign of the Emperor Claudius. But 2 was enough to proclaim that the stain had been washed away, at least in its greater part. Germanicus wanted to continue. He was convinced that 1 more campaign would be enough to end the war definitively. He sent word to the Emperor Tiberius requesting authorization. The response was calculated, cold, and final. Rome's vengeance was fulfilled. The cost of keeping so many men on the far side of the Rhine was too high for any possible gain. The Germanic tribes, left to themselves, would end up destroying one another through their own rivalries. Germanicus was to return. The young general obeyed, but he did so with a heavy heart. On the 26th of May in the 17th year after Christ, Germanicus celebrated his triumph in Rome. The streets of the capital filled with crowds acclaiming the man who had avenged the legions of Varus. Germanic prisoners marched in chains. The recovered standards were carried in procession. Among the captives was Thusnelda, the wife of Arminius, with her child in her arms, a boy born on Roman soil who would never know his father's lands. The Roman people looked on in solemn silence. It was not exactly rejoicing. It was the bitter satisfaction of one who closes a wound they had believed could never heal. Arminius survived the defeat. He fled deeper into Germania, trying to rebuild what he had lost. But the defeat at Idistaviso had broken something more than his army. It had broken the myth of his invincibility. The tribes that had once followed him began to doubt. In the 21st year after Christ, 5 years after Idistaviso, Arminius was murdered by his own kinsmen, men of his own tribe, who feared his ambition for absolute power. The man who had changed the course of history died by betrayal before reaching 40 years of age. Tiberius himself had earlier refused an offer to have Arminius secretly poisoned. His response was memorable. "It is not by secret treachery, but openly and by force of arms that the Roman people take vengeance on their enemies." He was right. Rome's vengeance had arrived in open ground under the sun of the Vaser, with interlocked shields and eagles at the front. The Rhine became the permanent frontier of the Roman Empire. Germania remained free, separated from the Roman world by a river and by the memory of what had happened in the Teutoburg forest. That freedom would have consequences no Roman of the time could have imagined. The Germanic peoples, who had withstood Germanicus, would be, centuries later, the ones who shook the foundations of the empire itself. The Franks, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Saxons, all of them carriers of the fire of that resistance kindled beside the Vaser. Germanicus died in the 19th year in Antioch, under dark circumstances that many attributed to political poison. He was 33 years old. Rome mourned his death as if it had lost a second Augustus. The veterans of the Rhine who had fought at his side would never forget the image of that general who had walked into the Teutoburg forest with a spade to bury the dead and had walked out as the voice of an empire's revenge. The skulls were no longer nailed to the oaks. The bones had been returned to the earth. The eagles, 2 of them, had come home. The Teutoburg forest still stood, impassive and dark beneath the northern drizzle, and in its depths, where sunlight never fully reaches, something remains, the distant echo of 3 legions that went in and never came out, and farther still, barely audible, the thunder of 8 that crossed the Rhine to find them. Rome never forgot. Rome never forgot. That was always its deepest strength, and perhaps also its heaviest burden.